This is your time, so I just want to make that clear up front. The slideshow is what it is. I want you guys to get out of this what you need to. So feel free, like I said, ask questions throughout. We'll go through a couple of case scenarios as well, just some things that can be hang-ups, and see how we come out in 45 minutes or so. So first off, what is FMLA? I think we all know this, but just to be sure that we're not missing anyone, it provides that job protection for someone to miss work if themselves or a family member need to miss work for a serious medical condition. So what is the serious medical conditions? A lot of times it's birth or adoption of a newborn or placement of a child for adoption. The employee's own health condition, a family member's health condition that requires your care, the qualifying exigency due to military active duty, or the care of next of kin for someone who was seriously injured in the line of duty for military service. So those bottom two with the military kind of coming into play, those are the two that add a little extra time. So you see the 12 weeks unpaid job protected leave during the 12-month period. Those military ones can offer more time, so it can actually double that time period. So that's something that we don't deal with that a lot, so when it comes up, it can hang up a little bit. So, and then they can be continuous or intermittent. And I would say, if I ask for a show of hands, who prefers continuous? We tracking over intermittent. Everyone would raise their hand because intermittent is hard. Things definitely get a little tricky. And then the criteria for FMLA eligibility. So this kind of covers the employers, more than 50 employees within a 75-mile radius. Is everyone in the room kind of in that bucket, I would assume? And then the employee must meet two pieces of criteria. They have to have 12 months of service with your company, and they have to work 1,250 hours within the last 12 months. So again, kind of some basic guidelines that we have to follow there for those qualifications. Risks of non-compliance. So again, these are things that we see as trends, and we'll get into a couple of slides here in a second that really are infographics that show some of the trends that we've seen. So coming out of the 2008 recession, FMLA lawsuits really escalated for whatever reason and have continued to remain high year over year. The amount of FMLA lawsuits have just continued to grow. Employers have been found liable in 50% of FMLA lawsuits in the year of 2017, and the result was $1.5 million in back wages paid. So, that's someone who went out on FMLA, they were, fired, lawsuit, they were rehired and had to get back wages. So those are some of the, risks that can be assessed. And then on the far left, or I guess your right, my left, HR managers and supervisors can be held personally liable. So let's say your company has a policy, but you misinterpret the policy, or one of your managers does something that misinterprets the policy. They could be personally held liable in addition to the company if there is action taken against the employee. So that can be serious. When you think of showing up to work and in good faith you think you're doing things right, and then all of a sudden you're personally hit with a lawsuit, that can be very serious. So that just kind of brings into play how serious or how important it is to know the rules to FMLA and really your policy and how it interacts with FMLA as well. So a couple of trends. I don't know how well this slide interprets into this bigger picture. But some things that are interesting. 59% of workers in America are eligible for FMLA or qualify for FMLA. Some of those things, 90% of employees report that they do return to work for the same employer. So again, very important that we follow those FMLA guidelines, because you don't want to lose good employees due to those medical leaves. Hopefully the 10% that don't return to work are the ones you don't want to return to work. And that you're you're not losing the ones that you really want to return to work. So very down at the bottom, you see the heavy lift, and so that's what you guys feel every day. All of these things kind of add up to what makes FMLA so hard to manage and so complex. And so I think that's really what this infographic is really telling us. The thing that was shocking to me a little bit on the infographic is that 21% of FMLA cases are pregnancy or new child. I always thought that number would have been higher, but it's not. 55% are their own illness, and that probably is a lot of migraines, a lot of things like that we're all used to kind of dealing with. But then on the very far side, this is where it really highlights the importance. From 2012 to 2016, FMLA lawsuits increased by 200%. That's a pretty heavy number, and that is due to everyone's awareness on FMLA just continues to grow. And I think we'll continue to see that. The Department of Labor keeps pushing out more things to make sure your employees are aware, to make sure all your managers are aware, your supervisors are aware. So FMLA is going up, and with FMLA going up, so does their awareness that it's a big potential lawsuit, if you make a mistake. So, and as you saw in the previous slide, 50% of those end up in favor. So you go to court, it's a 50-50 toss-up. So you'll also see at the bottom, tracking intermittent leave continues to, and I don't ever see that changing being the biggest challenge with managing FMLA activity. Just the nature. We've had some clients that we work with that they have folks that take FMLA intermittently in 15-minute segments. So some of you may have that. I see some looks on faces that says you have experience with those types of folks. So that's definitely where it gets a little bit tricky. So our next infographic is really on the pregnancy and parental leave in America. Does anyone here have paid parental leave or pregnancy leave? I know some states mandate that. I know Kentucky is not one of those states, so I think you're fortunate there, but I wasn't sure if anyone had any policy specific to your locations, so it doesn't look like that's the case. So that's good, because that just adds another layer of complexity. I know for our company, we have a 12-week paid leave policy for maternity leave that kind of works with FMLA. The challenge with that can be, for your company policy, you can set the 12 weeks has to be right after the birth, but you can't really mandate that for FMLA. You have a year to kind of utilize their 12 weeks of leave. So when you have those kind of company policies that work against or with FMLA, it gets a little bit tricky. But this again just kind of breaks down. I really take this as a positive slide because it really does show that women on maternity leave are really not looking to take advantage of the company as much as you might think. I think with other illnesses that may come into play, but 23% take less than 2 weeks, which was shocking. Again, when I looked at this infographic, that was shocking to me because I don't think in my experience I've seen less than really 6 weeks get taken. And so then 50% take less than 2 months. So, in general FMLA, they could be taking 3 months. So, to me that's a good, it's a good statistic. We highlighted there some of the states. California, obviously, always, if somebody's going overboard, it's California. New Jersey, New York, Rhode Island are some of those states that have maternity leaves in addition to FMLA and require some extra bonding time and those types of things. So I want to say fortunately and unfortunately in Kentucky you don't have that, so I guess it's fortunate for you all because you don't have to manage it. Unfortunate if you're someone who needs extra bonding leave or maternity leave, but the state doesn't provide that. So it depends on the seat you're sitting in on that particular day. So some of the challenges, and I probably don't even have to list these off to you. You know what your challenges are. I could probably ask all of you what your challenges are. You can tell me better than I could tell you. But the complexity of the law, federal and state mandates. So again, in Kentucky, the state mandates are not as rigid, I guess, as some other states. So you have mainly just the federal portion that you're dealing with. Often managed manually. Show of hands, you're tracking this on spreadsheets or just paper files, putting those in files. So that can be tricky, especially for intermittent leaves. I think that's a huge challenge because you don't have something that's popping up to tell you, hey, this person is over their time limit. You're really just having to know who you have on FMLA and what their time frames are. So that has been one of the interesting things as we have gotten into this, offering this service. One of the interesting things to look at is all the different ways people are trying to track that, either successfully or not. Some of those intermittent leaves. Time intensive, especially for all of you that raise your hand and said we're doing this manually, just again, the time it takes to track it, and not even just the time it takes to write things in a spreadsheet or put it in a file, it's the mental aspect of, even when you don't have something to do, is there something I'm forgetting? So those are our challenges, and that all circles back to what we were talking about earlier, about the liability to the company, to yourself, if those things are. So it's kind of that stress that kind of goes into the thought process. And then how do you keep your employees notified? How do they know when they should be taking FMLA, when, what their responsibilities are, because they have a job to do and all of that as well. And your managers that are out on the front line, I think that's probably, for everything we've seen, that's where your biggest liability is. Managers on the front line, they hate FMLA. They don't like that their employees are using it, and they really don't understand why they have to do it. So that's one of the things that we put an initiative on, is that employee engagement. So if we had a check on your to-do box, is to see what you can do to get your frontline supervisors and managers up to speed on FMLA and why it's important. They are probably going to be your biggest detractors from, somebody walks up and says, hey, I'm going to be off work for a week and it's because of this medical reason. They're going to try to shut that down, and you're never even going to know that happened. So getting them to understand why this is so important is probably your biggest hurdle and biggest challenge from that perspective. And then some of the specific challenges, when I think through, your municipal organizations, your public servants and things like that, the complexity of schedules that you all have to deal with has to be just insane. And so that all plays into, like, how does FMLA treat this schedule versus this schedule versus this schedule? So those are all things that there's information out there on. Of course, I would say to you, I think my contact information is on here when we're finished, so you can always feel free to reach out. We're all friends now, so if you ever have questions, feel free to reach out. And then after that, ADA accommodations. So somebody's cleared to come back to work, but not really 100% back to work. So that's where your ADA accommodations fit in. And we see a lot of folks in HR struggling with that piece of it. So somebody can come back, do we have to let them come back? If they can come back on a half a schedule, but it really doesn't meet our business needs, do we really have to do that? So all of those things, with ADA it gets tricky just because it can be individual basis, where FMLA you pretty much have to treat everyone the same way. With ADA, it's really job description, what can be done, what can't be done, those types of things that will drive the decision making there. So I would say our recommendation is always to be reasonable, as long as you're reasonable, and if there's something you can do, you're probably better off to go ahead and make those accommodations. But to be very specific when you're making an accommodation, you want to put in exactly what the accommodation is for, the hours that they're expected to work, and don't let them deviate from that at that point. If they need some extra accommodation, they really have to go through a process to get that. Because again, that's where you can get into an abuse situation. So we are always in favor of, with an ADA accommodation, really spelling it out. It's almost like a new job description for that time period, and you really have to hold them to it. Any questions on any of those challenges or anything specific? Any challenges that we don't have up here? That you would have. All right, so then our next slide is really trying to get into the nitty gritty of what should an FMLA case look like from start to finish. Really to make sure you've dotted all the I's, crossed all the T's. I actually said that right this time. I usually totally cross the I's and dot the T's. So I'm glad I said it right. So it all really starts with the leave intake and the data collection. Someone has to request a leave, but what does that look like? And I think that's where we're seeing a lot of subjectivity and a lot of things changing. There is a case right now that we're looking at really hard to try to figure out exactly how this case was ruled against the employer. But it just kind of highlights this part of it, how difficult it is to know when somebody has really requested a leave. So we like to think we have a leave request form and they're going to fill it out, they're going to give us their medical condition, the time they need off, all of these things, and then that's going to prompt us to deliver them their HCP or their health certificate that they provide to their doctor. But what we're hearing more and more is if I walk up to my manager and say, hey, I've got to take these 3 days off, I've got a medical condition, that is putting you on notice. And so the case that we're looking at right now even goes beyond that because the HCP to us is very important. That's the doctor certifying. This person has the condition they say they have, and this is how much time you can expect them to miss. So in the case we're looking at right now, the request for leave was very informal. It was to a manager, I'm going to need this time off. The manager, of course, said, yeah, I can't do it. We can't afford to not have you here that day. The person took off anyway for their condition, surgery, whatever it was. I don't even have that detail yet. They were fired from their job because they took the time off anyway. HR probably never knew this was happening. There was never a health care certificate provided. There was never a doctor's note brought in. The employee sued the company and won the lawsuit, even without an HCP or anything like that. So that's where it gets tricky because did this person really need FMLA? We may never know because the doctor didn't really certify or ever certify their condition. Maybe during the court case, the doctor came in and certified it, but it didn't really happen during the process. So again, it just shows the importance of kind of following these steps. And again, making sure your managers and frontline supervisors know when they've been put on notice that someone needs FMLA. Because then that spawns, do any of you have where your frontline supervisors are the ones providing the FMLA forms? I wouldn't think so. Do you?
Yeah.
Okay.
We've just started. They provide the notice of eligibility.
Okay.
We just started that.
Okay. So that can be good in a way from at least you know your frontline supervisors have been educated on what it is and when it's needed. In a lot of cases we see frontline supervisors are responsible for engaging HR or telling the employee to engage HR. And then HR takes over and gives out all of the FMLA forms, the documents, the certificates, and return those. But that's the thing, that's where the gap is if they let the frontline supervisor know, it doesn't just stop there. So education for your frontline is important in the leave intake process.
If I might say, it took 18 years to get to the point where I'm comfortable.
I would say, yeah. We've engaged with a lot of managers and frontline supervisors, and even after we go through, I can't tell you how many of these types of things we've gone through to try to educate, they still don't get it. Even in our company, our department managers still don't get this stuff and why it's so important. So it's really, to me, if there's a gap in any company's process, that's where it's going to be. And it's not really a gap in your process, it's education. So then you move to the evaluation part of the process. So this is where you've confirmed eligibility, they've worked enough hours, they've been with the company long enough, all of those types of things. You have given them a notice that they're eligible. You've provided them with the HCP that they're going to bring to their doctor. And then you get to the FMLA leave determination. Is their condition eligible? Is it not? Those things seem kind of easy if everybody follows the process and the documentation. Do you guys have each your own HCP or your own document processes, or does the state provide anything specifically for that you have to come up with?
Yeah, this is Department of Labor.
Department of Labor. Yeah, that's good.
Use that.
So this part too, I guess from the FMLA leave determination where, again, where it gets a little tricky is the continuous versus the intermittent. And I'm always curious to know from folks like you, if someone comes back and the doctor says, hey, they have this condition, we'll just use migraines because it's common. They have this migraine condition, expect them to be out 4 days or 4 times a month. How are you all keeping track of that?
You're keeping track of it for us.
Yeah, I mean, for a couple of you,
You're
that's
the
what I
one.
heard, but yeah.
Our time and attendance software allows you to enter their out for family medical leave, and then whether it's charged to receive for vacation or unpaid.
Okay. And so does it tell you then if somebody is exceeding their time? Like, let's say the doctor says you should expect this person to miss 4 times in a month. Does it have any particulars that say, hey, this person's exceeded that?
No, the supervisor has to manage that.
Okay.
We do let them know that this person's been approved for this amount of time off related to a medical condition, and then they have to
keep you.
Yeah, for every minute they do.
Yeah, it's interesting, case studies, I don't even want to say case studies. We had a case, we had a client or a potential client that came to us and they said, hey, we've got this scenario, we wonder if you guys can help. And it's this situation, the guy has migraines, his schedule has him working weekends. This is a union shop too, it makes it all much better. And so, his schedule has him working weekends. The job he is in is mandatory that he works weekends to get his job done, and he can't work weekends. So his FMLA is for migraines for up to 4 occurrences per month, and he's missing every Saturday and Sunday. That's 8. And so they came to us and they're like, so what can we really do about this? I'm like, well, first thing you can do is recertify that. We recertify every month. I'm like, okay, so does the doctor recertify that he can miss 8 days instead of 4? No, the doctor keeps saying he should only be missing up to 4 per month, and there is no expectation that it should be Saturday and Sunday. This should really be randomly occurring throughout the week. If it's every Saturday and Sunday, he's in violation of his certification. So HR agrees, the doctor agrees. Management won't really take action against him because they don't want to risk a lawsuit. So at that point I said, well, there's really nothing more we can do to help you with that particular case except take the aggravation of filing his absences every week for you and tracking how much time he's used so that when he's finally out of his time, we can send the notices. So they finally, reluctantly, they kind of went with our services and still expected us miraculously to fix this problem. We couldn't. And then it turned into, they're like, hey, so we think we have a solution. This is where the union shop comes into play. We think we have a solution. We've readjusted his schedule so that he's going to work now Monday through Friday. So that kind of takes the Saturday, Sunday every week missing out of the loop. And it worked really well for about 3 or 4 weeks until the union realized what they had done. They're like, well, you're still paying him as if his schedule is over the weekend, and everybody else working his current shift is not on that pay, so you either have to bump their pay or move him back to weekends. So the union kind of screwed them on that one a little bit because they felt like they had it worked out, but they really can't move every other weekday employee up to his pay rate, and they didn't, again, feel like they could lower his pay rate to the weekday schedule because that's what they had agreed to, and again, they didn't want to risk the lawsuit. So that's the mess you guys can get into, as you are well aware, with some of those things. But that's where that FMLA leave determination is important. I would say being more municipal, you're probably a little more cut and dry if somebody is abusing like that heavily. I mean, show of hands, would you guys be taking action or would you continue to let that ride? Okay. That's what I like to hear, because just letting it ride just opens you guys up for more people to, again, when we talk about the FMLA awareness coming up, and in this particular location, I think this company that we're working with has 13 locations across Indiana, Kentucky, Ohio. That location is the only one they have FMLA problems in. It starts with one person, then it spreads. And so that's, again, what you guys are up against from that perspective. That's where the monitoring comes into, your absence tracking. Again, continuous leaves, they're in, they're out, easy peasy. These intermittent, just tracking how much time they've actually used. Really getting into the detail. I don't know, when I got into FMLA, I didn't realize you could take it in as low increments as you can, but like I said earlier, we have clients that take it in 15-minute increments, and there are some people that are using 8 times a day, 15-minute increments, because they're exceeding their break pattern. So they'll use FMLA in 15-minute increments so they can have a break every hour to take care of whatever condition that they have. So it gets, again, really tricky. Even if you have a systematic approach, that's hard to track. Remaining entitlement updates. So I think this is important. This is where you keep your employees informed and engaged. This is how much time you've used. This is how much time you have left for your folks who are actively on FMLA. That can, what we have found is any touch point that gets them in the know will kind of keep them. I mean, you're going to have some people that are just brutal about, you know, they know they're beating up the system and they don't care. But for your folks that actually do care, sending them something on a monthly basis to let them know where they're at usually will help keep things in check. And then an exhaustion notice to us is really important too, so that people know when they're coming close to exhausting their FMLA is a really good part of the process. Return to work and medical release forms, kind of in that fourth bucket, and then the return to work confirmation. All of those things are important, especially if you have a payroll system that automatically turns pay on and off for folks who are out on leave. That process, can be another point to make sure you have those in your process. And then for reviewing for accommodations, that's kind of across the board. You're reviewing job description versus what the doctor has released them for and seeing if there's a duration of time where they're going to be on limited duty. Always important to include in the FMLA process. It can keep you from having a recurring FMLA process for certain types of conditions. So it's something that we definitely recommend having as part of every FMLA case towards the end. Any questions? Any insights from you guys who are doing this every day as well? Things that you do that others may benefit from? Yep.
I feel kind of funny bringing this up, but I'm not doing a return to work confirmation, so what should I be doing?
Yeah, so again, that's really dependent on the company. So if you're HR and you're central and you have several locations, how do you really know that person returned? Did they actually show up that day? That type of thing. So that part doesn't have to be that formal as long as somebody has eyes on it.
I'm doing it informal, thank you.
Okay.
A little more detail.
So how many of you outsource or have someone else that does your FMLA? I know you do. And I know
And
they have
it's
these
a
things.
beautiful thing, let me just tell you. They're not invested in out the
Love for Chard Snyder.
Love for
They
Chard
do it.
Snyder.
It's cheap and they're great.
They're great, and it's the best thing I've ever done.
Well, thank you. I don't have to do that. But really, I'm here to kind of talk to you guys. I don't like the shameless plugs in the gift front, but if you ever consider outsourcing your FMLA, this is just kind of a checklist of things that for you, because there are challenges with outsourcing your FMLA as well, because you're going to be a little outside the loop. And so it's important that you stay informed and that you have all the tools necessary to make sure you know what's going on with your folks. So we just put together a little checklist of if you ever decide to outsource your FMLA, these are the things you really want to look for, because there are various FMLA services out there that go from, there's a system that gives you self-service to full service to kind of partial maybe service. So it's just important to kind of get that full checklist of items if you ever choose to outsource, just to make sure you're staying in the loop and everything. So. And this actually probably goes with that last slide. It's just some kind of group trends overviews, things, again, if you're outsourcing, things that are going to stay important to you, is knowing kind of your FMLA reasons and demographics, the leave durations, leave characteristic types, absence patterns, days and months, and lost work days. Those are all things that if you are outsourcing are important things for you to understand from a case management perspective. And that really brings us to questions and answers. And if there are questions, this is usually my favorite part of the presentation. So, yes.
So I got myself in a situation with workers' comp and FMLA, and that was a big learning. You had a pregnant woman fall in our parking lot, broke her leg, and then she actually had the baby. So this whole time I'm treating it as workers' comp, never did I think about FMLA.
Okay.
So then after she got surgery, then she's like, I would like to take
Did
my
she went over
FMLA.
12?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it ended up being she was out for 6 months.